Over years of testing, I developed specific criteria for evaluating whether supplementary books enhance the primary selections or create information overload that slows actual progress. Most people make the mistake of reading randomly within psychology, hoping more information will create better results, when the opposite proves true through systematic study. Supporting texts must complement different aspects of the core integration work without introducing conflicting frameworks. For example, Peter Levine's work on somatic experiencing provides additional tools for completing interrupted survival responses that extend the nervous system regulation foundation established by Van der Kolk. His techniques for tracking sensation and discharge patterns offer specific methods for working with activation states that arise during integration work. Similarly, contemporary Jungian publications from the C.G. Jung Institute provide practical applications of shadow work that deepen the theoretical framework presented in Meeting the Shadow. The selection process for supplementary reading requires tracking which additional books enhanced versus hindered progress with the core 5 selections. Books that enhanced the work provided specific techniques that supported the primary practices without creating intellectual distraction. Books that hindered progress offered interesting concepts that pulled attention away from sustained integration work. The key became recognizing that more information rarely equals better transformation results. Recent publications exploring active imagination teach specific methods for engaging unconscious content safely, building on the shadow work foundation. Texts focusing on archetypal psychology help identify larger patterns that influence personal development beyond individual trauma history. Advanced Jungian works require careful selection because many publications remain too academic for practical application. Books that focus on case studies and clinical applications prove more useful than theoretical analyses that provide no concrete guidance for personal work. Consciousness research publications provide scientific validation for experiences that emerge during intensive integration work. Books exploring psychedelic therapy research offer frameworks for understanding expanded states that sometimes occur during deep psychological work. Texts examining meditation and brain plasticity research validate the neurological changes that accompany sustained transformation practices. This convergence between scientific research and transformative psychology creates unprecedented validation for integration approaches. The critical timing for introducing supplementary texts requires minimum 6 months of active practice with each core book before adding new material from the same category. This spacing prevents the common mistake of accumulating knowledge faster than integration capacity allows. Research on habit formation and neural integration demonstrates that psychological patterns require extended practice periods to become stable behavioral tendencies. Rushing through foundational material creates superficial understanding rather than embodied transformation. Advanced texts become appropriate only after demonstrating mastery of foundational concepts through sustained behavioral change. Someone who has successfully completed nervous system regulation work might explore advanced somatic therapy techniques. Someone who has integrated basic shadow work might engage with complex analytical publications. The progression must be earned through practical application rather than intellectual readiness. Identifying readiness for more advanced psychological work requires honest assessment of current integration levels rather than desire for new material. Signs of readiness include consistent application of basic techniques during challenging situations, stable emotional regulation that persists during stress, and observable changes in relationship patterns that others notice without prompting. Intellectual understanding of concepts without embodied application indicates need for continued work with foundational material. The expanded library connects to latest developments in consciousness research through publications that bridge scientific findings with practical applications. Recent studies on psychedelic therapy validate many insights from transpersonal psychology texts. Research on meditation and neuroplasticity confirms effectiveness of contemplative practices described in consciousness development books. Studies on attachment and neuroscience support the relationship repair approaches outlined in advanced attachment texts. Balancing reading with practicing requires strict discipline because the temptation to consume information exceeds capacity for integration by significant margins. The optimal ratio involves spending 3 hours practicing techniques for every hour spent reading new material. Reading sessions should focus on identifying specific practices to implement rather than accumulating theoretical knowledge. Integration journals should track which concepts translate into behavioral change versus which remain intellectual entertainment. Advanced practitioners develop ability to extract practical techniques from academic or theoretical texts without getting distracted by information that serves no transformation purpose. They learn to identify authors who write from direct experience versus those who synthesize research without personal application. They recognize which books provide tools for continued growth versus those that satisfy curiosity without supporting actual development. The supplementary library also includes texts that address specific challenges that emerge during intensive integration work. Books focusing on spiritual emergency provide guidance for navigating consciousness expansion safely. Publications on integration overwhelm offer strategies for managing psychological destabilization. Texts exploring the relationship between trauma healing and creativity address artistic expressions that often emerge during recovery work. Building this extended library requires years of careful selection and testing through personal application. Each supplementary text must prove its value through measurable contribution to ongoing transformation rather than intellectual satisfaction alone. The goal becomes creating a curated collection that supports decades of continued growth rather than accumulating impressive book collections that serve status rather than development. Current findings on trauma and memory processing validate somatic approaches that address body-based trauma storage. Research on shadow projection and psychological defense mechanisms confirms analytical insights about unconscious material. Studies on adult development support the consciousness evolution frameworks described in transpersonal psychology publications. This scientific validation creates unprecedented credibility for integration approaches that were previously dismissed by mainstream psychology. This extended library creates a complete curriculum for psychological transformation that can guide decades of meaningful inner work through systematic selection of texts that enhance rather than distract from core integration practices. But having access to these resources raises fundamental questions about what you plan to do with this knowledge, and whether you understand the responsibility that comes with genuine psychological reconstruction tools. The complete sequence creates a systematic pathway through psychological reconstruction. Somatic regulation establishes nervous system stability. Shadow work reclaims disowned aspects. Attachment repair rewires relational patterns. Transpersonal development integrates spiritual experiences, and developmental psychology maps consciousness evolution beyond conventional therapeutic goals. These 5 books represent the complete architecture of psychological reconstruction, from nervous system regulation through consciousness evolution. They provide systematic protocols for dismantling dysfunctional personality structures and rebuilding authentic psychological foundations. This isn't casual reading material for people seeking validation or quick fixes. Consider what single step you might take today toward genuine integration work rather than accumulating more psychological knowledge. Perhaps it's beginning daily nervous system regulation practices, or honestly examining which shadow projections control your relationships. The choice between transformation and intellectual collection remains entirely yours.